Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this session on APA referencing using the APA 7th edition. This session will function as an introduction or a reminder, depending on what level you're at with using referencing at the moment. This session is going to help you understand the need of referencing, understand when to include in-text citations to sources in your text, and help you learn how to use and apply the APA 7th edition style in your work. So it is going to talk you through the principles behind it, as well as talking about how to apply them within your work. So what do we understand by the term referencing? It's a word which has quite a few things packed into it. Generally speaking, when we talk about referencing, we're talking about it being a vital part of academic writing. It involves acknowledging the source of information that you've used for your assignment. That information might be words, it might be an image, it might be ideas. We're informing the reader of the source that we've used so they can find them and use them themselves. So we can be looking at a quotation from a book or an article, a summary of an article we've read, statistics from a website, or an image or picture taken again from a web source. There are also other places we can reference from, which we will talk about maybe later on in this session. So why do we need to reference? Why do you think we need to reference material we've used for our writing or research? Can anyone drop in the chat box why they think key reasons for referencing are? Okay, so Fawaz has pulled out to avoid plagiarism, and we've got make our work credible, avoid plagiarism, so people know we're not making things up. These are all really good things. So those are definitely reasons why we need to reference. So there are four main reasons we tend to pull out, which are kind of interconnected. They help us to support our arguments with evidence and examples. So it gives us kind of backup to our ideas by saying other people have evidenced this in the past. It helps us to show credit and recognition to other people for their work. This helps us to avoid plagiarism. It helps to separate our ideas from the ideas of other people. So good citation practice makes it very clear what's my idea and what's the idea I took from someone else. And it demonstrates the quality of resources you've used and your knowledge of the subject. It allows you to show you've used good quality sources and that you've read around the topic. You've maybe gone beyond the reading list. You've found out things for yourself. So essentially, referencing and citation also allows us to show off a little bit. That idea of plagiarism and tied in with that, the idea of academic integrity. These are things we need to be aware of to make sure that we don't run afoul of them. Plagiarism is defined by Coventry University as the act of using other people's words, images, etc., whether these are published or unpublished, as if they were your own. So passing off someone else's work as your own is, generally speaking, a good definition for plagiarism. Plagiarism can be deliberate, but quite often it's just caused by poor referencing and citation practice. So you'll accidentally pass off someone else's work as your own. This can happen if you fail to make it clear when you're quoting from something, if you give inaccurate information about where you got something from, so we can't find it ourselves, or if you don't indicate what source you used to enough detail. So there are different kinds of plagiarism, different kind of grades. So if we mimic someone else's work, word for word, as our own, we are definitely cloning their work. This is what Turnitin kind of have lumped together lots of different ways of describing plagiarism. So clone is their word for that. If you copy and paste a significant amount of work from somewhere else without saying where that information has come from, without showing us exactly where that information came from by using a citation, again, we're in that plagiarism area. If we change keywords and phrases, but don't point out where that idea has come from, again, we want to make sure that's very clear in citation Otherwise, we are kind of accidentally plagiarizing. If we kind of mix multiple sources together, so taking ideas from 3 different sources, bringing them together in a sentence, is really a good way of writing that. But we need to make it clear where each of those threads of the argument has come from, so that we can try to pull that together as a reader as well. It helps to reinforce that the arguments you're making have come from somewhere else, and it helps to show your reading as well. Be aware you can also plagiarize yourself. So if you reuse elements of previous work, particularly if it's gone through Turnitin in the past, we can see problems come up from this. It will flag us coming from a student at Coventry University, or if you were at a different college previously, it can flag us coming from that college. We have to do new work for every assessment to make sure we don't have that problem. Self-plagiarism used to be a slightly smaller issue. The way we now assess for plagiarism, it can be slightly problematic. If you bring together loads of correctly cited sources without, if you have a hybrid approach, so if you bring together correctly cited sources along with bits where you haven't cited correctly, so you've got inconsistent practice, this can actually make it feel a little bit like you're trying to hide the fact you plagiarized in that section. So we need to make sure we're really consistent with how we approach our citation all the way through our assignment to make it clear at each case where we have got information from. Try to make sure you're pointing at the right information. So we sometimes get issues where web addresses in particular are put into reference lists, and actually when we click on them, they don't work. Try to make sure your links work. This is perhaps a slightly smaller issue sometimes, but we can't kind of point at non-existent sources. You absolutely cannot make up a source to support an argument if you are struggling to find something. The final area there isn't really plagiarism, but it's not a good academic practice. So if you've got proper citation to loads of different sources, you've done everything perfectly citing and referencing, but there's no original thought in there other than collecting other people's ideas. So you're just aggregating things together. That's also not good academic practice. We need to have your interpretation, your response to the learning outcomes you need to demonstrate in your assignment. So whilst we want to support our argument with evidence, we can't just provide a massive list of evidence and hope that answers the assignment brief. So getting the mix right is also important. So there's key questions which come up from that. When should we add a reference to our work? And are there circumstances where we don't need to reference? We need to add a reference to our work whenever we've been informed by the ideas or the words or the work of someone else. We don't need to find a reference necessarily if we're using information which we already are aware of, which will be common knowledge for someone studying our course at that level. So my example of this is generally, we can all say the sky is blue without having to have a citation for that. If I say the sky is blue due to a chemical composition including trace amounts of certain noble gases, I probably want a citation for that because I need to check on what those composition levels are. So if there's more detail involved, if it's something where you need to look it up, we definitely have a citation for it. If in doubt, it's worth having a citation, but there are some circumstances where we can provide an idea without having to find a citation necessarily. In order to do this, and tying in with those words I've used before, citation and reference, we have a referencing style. The referencing style is a set of rules which tells us what details need to appear to point correctly at the sources we used to come up with the ideas we're presenting in our assignment. They help us present our references in an orderly, professional, and neatly formatted way. So we're aiming for a consistent approach on how we point at what we looked at to come up with the ideas in our assignment. So at CU Group, we use the APA 7th edition style on nearly every course. There are some exceptions. There are some students who are still studying on the Harvard referencing style, who are in the 3rd year for the most part. They will be working from little blue guides. We do not want to be using the blue guides if we're on APA. It is just slightly different. Not really different enough that you can necessarily see the difference, but it is different enough that it will cause issues when it comes to marking if you're mixing your sources. So the APA 7th edition style tells us exactly which details about a source we are being asked to use and how they should be presented. We ideally need to use this referencing style throughout all of our assessed work, whether that's an essay or a report, or a poster, or a presentation. The principles remain the same, even if the actual execution might be slightly different, particularly for spoken assignments. Help is available with using all these ideas on our LibGuides pages, which we will look at towards the end of this session, and I'll also drop a link in the chat as well. So there are two parts to the APA style. There's an in-text citation, which goes with your actual assignment text itself, whether that's the essay, whether that's a poster. That will help you refer within your work to the sources you've used to come up with those ideas. There's also a reference list. This is a list of all the sources you've used, which comes at the end of your assignment. So one way of understanding this is to, just going to flick quickly over to a different browser window, share that. So is to have a look at something which we don't really want to use for many of our assignments, which is Wikipedia. This is a common way of actually understanding how a citation and reference works. So whilst there are lots of different information sources linked on Wikipedia, we also have these little numbers which appear after certain statements are made. These are providing information about where that information came from to inform that Wikipedia article. So in this article for CU Scarborough, there are several sources cited giving information proving that these things happened. So the first cohort of students studies classes at Scarborough Spa, and then they're giving a citation explaining where that information came from. Then a reference list at the end of the article tells me that number 2, it actually came from a coventry.ac.uk page, Scarborough Spa confirmed as Launchpad for CUSC. So here I can see the author because it's been given there. I can see the title of it. I can see when the information was published, and I've got a web address for it in the link. These principles are very much the same as what we end up using in APA as well. So I'll just flick the spreadsheet back to where we were. Okay, so hopefully you can now see the presentation again. So what does an in-text citation look like in APA? We want to give an in-text citation when we quote, when we paraphrase, summarize, include data, include an image. Anytime where we're using information from somewhere other than our own mind, we need to give a citation. This takes the form of the author's surname, year of publication, and a page number if there is one available and it is appropriate to do so. Let's move that out of the way as well. Okay, so this looks like the example on the screen. If we are naming the person as part of our sentence, we would give the extra information in brackets. So Cottrell, in a book published in 2013, claims that critical thinking, when reading, to academic success. When we're not talking about the as looking like this, comes at the end of a sentence, all the information is given in brackets at the end of the sentence before the full stop, keeping the idea and the person who originated it together in the same sentence. Okay, I can see I've got a hand up. So Nadine, have you got a question for us at the moment? If you'd like to unmute or type in the chat box.
Sorry, Tom, I was about to ask for recording of this session, but then thereafter you mentioned that you're going to record it, so it's fine.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. So yeah, as I say, the recording of this session will become available on the same link page you probably came through to get to this session today, on the workshops link with the CU Group, CUG Libraries guide. Okay, so based on what we've just said, looking at these two examples here, which one of these APA in-text citations appears to be correct? You think it's going to be A, B, C, or D? Okay, so it's actually C. B would be perfectly acceptable, but C has been pointed out as being correct. B would be acceptable, except for the fact that we have actually abbreviated the authors. We've used et al. There. We've not talked about that in this session yet, so it's quite a cruel question, that one, I think. So C is giving both named authors, the year it was published, and the page number. A has got that information available. It's just formatted a little bit differently from what we wanted. B has just used et al. Slightly incorrectly, because we don't want to use that for 2 people, use that for 3 people or more. D is the one where we really have a problem. So D is missing the year of publication, which we do ask for with whatever approach to citation we take. So A would kind of be acceptable, B would kind of be acceptable, C is correct, D is missing information we really want to see in our citation. So we're aiming to be consistent with our approach to citation and referencing. So we try to follow the pattern we're given for each individual citation and reference. It's nearly always going to be the authors, the year, and a page number if one is given and it is appropriate to do so. So our reference list, this comes at the end of the assignment. At the end of the assignment, coming on a new page. For that reason, it's often appropriate to include a page break beforehand. This means your reference list won't move up and down as you make edits above in the body of your essay. You can insert a page break by just going to insert, and page break will appear in Word. It's very similar in other word processing software as well. The reference list should contain listings on each line of the full details of the sources you've used as part of your writing of your assignment. It should match your in-text citations. So if you said Jobbat and Lancaster, as we saw in the previous example, it should also say Jobbat and Lancaster in your reference list. If you said BBC in your reference list, so if you said BBC in your citations, you shouldn't say British Broadcasting Corporation in your reference list. They should match up to make sure that they are the same format each time round. We want to sort our reference list alphabetically by the name of the first named author. We can do this right at the end when we've written our reference list. We can just highlight all our references, and there's a little sort A to Z button in Word. Again, that appears in most word processing software, just in different places. Just check for sort in the menu if you're not sure. If in doubt, speak to someone around campus who I'm sure will be able to help you, either from a library or from the EdTech team. We're aiming to write one long list of everything. So we don't need to separate out our books and our websites from our journals, unless you've been advised to do otherwise, which on a very small number of courses, you may be asked to do that for certain modules. Generally speaking, we are writing a single list of all our sources, A to Z by author, giving all the details we would need to find that source of information for ourselves. So these things link together. The in-text citation points at the reference list. We can see from the author and the year what reference we need to look at to find out more information. So one points to the other. So where do we find all this information? Because we're being asked for quite a bit. Year publication is not always that obvious. For a book, we're asked for things like edition and publisher. That is quite often a little bit tricky to find. It's not always straight in front of us. We can often look at the source itself and find some of this information. So for books, Just inside the front cover, just after the title page, there is usually what we call frontis matter. So this tells us things like when it was published, who the publisher is, that kind of thing. Websites is a little harder to find it because it's not necessarily as baked into the formatting to find the page, so to find the year it was written. Generally speaking, good quality websites will say when they were last updated. That is the date we want to use. And in terms of publisher, we are usually just going to be talking about the web address itself. Articles are a little more complicated. Again, it's usually on the first page of the article. Nearly all the information we need is going to be provided. This information is also brought together on a lot of our databases. So Locate, BiblyU, our EBSCOhost databases, our ProQuest databases. There'll be a little button you can click, which either says cite or reference, and it will give you generally a formatted APA reference that you can just take and paste into your work. So whilst we're talking today about how to build a reference, a lot of the time, the software will actually help you do it for yourself. You can also use online reference generators. As long as you're using the APA style, APA 7th edition style, it will put something out in the format that you need for your assignment. So there are multiple different ways of getting a reference created for you, but we will be talking today about how we put that together for ourselves, understanding the pattern we're required to use, just making sure that we've got a consistent product at the end of the process of building our reference list out. So books are quite often used as the default reference style. These are what we build everything else off of. And it follows quite nicely the pattern we tend to talk about when we talk about referencing. We're looking at who wrote it, when they wrote it, what it's called, how you'd find it. So our author, we tend to give the surname first, then a comma, then the initial or initials of that author. If we have multiple authors, we write them down in the order given on the book, in this case, because that is the order that they're generally known by. The year is the year which the edition you're reading was published. So reprints don't affect the year we give, but editions do. The title of the book, we tend to put in italics to make it stand out a little bit. If there's an edition, we add that in brackets. And the publisher of a book tells us a little bit about, who put that book available. Sometimes for older books, there may be multiple publishers who publish the same book. So certainly if you're looking at page numbers, that can be quite helpful information for us. Why are we being asked for this information? Why can't we just kind of do it however we want? The author tells us the authority, what qualifies them to be talking about the ideas that they're talking about in their book. So we can see what qualifications they have, what experience they have. The year tells us kind of how current that information is. Is it a little bit out of date? Is it up to date? So we want to know how recently the book was written. The title will tell us the scope of what you read. Is it about a narrow topic? Is it about a broad topic? The edition will give us some idea of if that information has been updated. The publisher gives us some idea of the level of the book. So if it's coming from a Penguin book, that might be maybe aimed at a mass audience. If it's coming from a Oxford University Press book, as we have on the example here, this is aimed at maybe a university level audience. So we can tell quite a bit from a little bit of information we ask for in a reference. So we're not just asking for it to be true, it does also give us some understanding of what you've read just by looking at your references. So we've been looking at that format for a little while now. So which one of these looks like the right format to match APA on the screen? Is it going to be A, B, C, or D? Okay, so In this case, it is B. A has all the information we asked for. The order is slightly different, and we actually have a little additional information there as well, in that we can see where it was published. C, again, has all the correct information and a little bit extra, and the order is just maybe a little bit different. We've got the et al. In there as well, which again, we prefer not to see. D is where we'd have problems because it really is missing some information we want. But B is in the format matching APA, where we've got the author, then the year, then the title, then the publisher. Pick up the questions from the chat as we were going through. There's nothing wrong with using a Penguin book in the right context. So if we're introducing a topic, a Penguin book will be absolutely fine. If we are making a very careful point based on academic evidence, a Penguin book may not quite go to the level we need to support that information. So we can't just make summary judgments about a source. We do need to kind of place it within the context of how we're using that information as well. So we can use multiple lower quality sources to kind of triangulate an idea. But we want to ideally be aiming towards using higher quality sources, particularly as we get into later years of study. I hope that helps. So websites are one of the other key formats we use, particularly in the last few years. We've moved to using a lot more online sources. And the format for these largely follows the same structure, regardless of whether it's a website, whether it's a blog, whether it's a recorded video, or something else that you've accessed online. So again, we can see the same format appearing here. We've got the author, the year, the title, and how we'd find it. In this case, how we'd find it is a web address. We've actually got two different approaches here showing. So in our example, we've got a working web link, but then in the one below it, where we've given an actual kind of Health and Care Professionals Council example, we've not made that a working web link. Neither approach is technically correct. You can give either way. Try to be consistent with how you do it. If you have a working web link, always have a working web link. If you present it as plain text, always present it as plain text. So it's always going to be that kind of format. You can see in the kind of pattern bit at the top, it does also mention a website name as well. So if we have an individually named person, we may also want to give a website name just to give some context of what you were looking at, particularly if that's not so clear from looking at the web address itself. So this is something we add in if we're looking at an individually named author. So for example, we might be looking at Stephen Fry, a Twitter tweet. So we might want to have Twitter, and as in the website name bit, in between the title and the web address. So that bit is, again, optional. Some parts of the patterns we see for referencing sources are optional. We try to make it clear where that is the case on the citation guidance online. For articles, this will apply for journals, for magazines, and also for newspapers as well. Again, we are giving information about the author, giving information about when it was published, the year it came out. Here we've got two different titles to deal with. So the smaller title, the title of the article, will go in plain text. The larger title, the title that we'd look for on the shelf or on the newsstand, that is going to go into italics. In order to identify which copy of the journal or newspaper or magazine you are looking at, we want to know kind of the issue information. So journals will use the volume and issue structure. A lot of magazines will be published under kind of months or issue numbers or something else. So it might have a date range on them, for example, for New Scientist. Newspapers generally will have just the day of the week that were published. So whatever information we need will be provided at that point for referencing in articles. We also are asked for page range as well. So what page does it start on? What page does it end on? That helps us flip to it quite quickly if we're looking at a very long publication. Finally, we're asked for something called a DOI. So DOI is a digital object identifier. This is a really short web link which will take us directly to the article you were looking at and the version of the article you were looking at. So particularly at the moment, we're seeing quite a lot of articles being released in preprint, where there may be some corrections done to them later on. So that DOI will subtly change if there is a newer version of the article published. There'll be a link to the newer version of the article with that. It will show the version of the article you looked at with it. So DOIs are used particularly in academic publishing to look at journal articles and link to them quite quickly and not worry about what platform they were on, that kind of thing. So sometimes we can't find all the information that we want. If we can't find a year of publication, we can replace this with ND in both our citation and our reference as well. If there's no edition given for books, then we can often leave that information out. If we can't find an individual author, so an individually named person, we can look for a corporate author or an organizational author. So we can often attribute writing to an organization, someone's writing on their behalf, particularly for organizations like a university, like the NHS or the BBC or bigger organizations. We can have people writing on their behalf. I've alluded to multiple authors a few times, and we've seen that et al. Come up in a few of our examples. If we have one or two authors, then we can list both their names in both the in-text citation and in the reference list entry. If there's 3 or more authors, which is more common for things like journal articles than for things like books, where we perhaps have a smaller number of people, we want to list the first named author and then put et al. That just means and other people, essentially. We do that in our in-text citation. Our reference list should always contain all of the names. This is where a reference coming from the journal webpage will be really helpful because you won't have to write all of them out. In extreme cases, there can be up to 20 people writing a journal article if it's a research team who puts it out. So it's quite common to see 5 or 6 names. That's quite a lot of names to get formatted correctly, but this is where a lot of those pages will give us a formatted reference directly for us. We can just check through it to make sure it all looks right and then plonk it into our reference list and we're done. So referencing is mostly following a pattern. We will provide some examples of things you can have a look at and have a go at referencing. But you may also want to just find some examples from your course. Have a look in your reading list, see if you can reference those books. Have a look at things that you've been directed to by your lecturers. Have a look to see if you can reference those. Having a go is the best way of picking up referencing. It is a pattern you need to follow. So we will be providing a Word document. I will link it in the chat in just a second. I'll do that now. It is a good idea to have a go at putting a reference together. I've lost my cursor. There we go. In order to cement some of these concepts. We want to use the, sorry, I really can't talk and look at my screen at the same time. It's a distraction for me. Just going to be careful not to send you the one which has got the answers on it. There we go. So it didn't send the first time around. I think it's because it was open. So let's just try that again, and hopefully this time it will send. There we go. So that has been sent in the chat, and this will also be linked to on the page for recording as well. So we suggest having a look at identifying the source type you're looking at, writing an in-text citation, and putting a reference together. In order to do this, it would be wise to have a look at the online guide for referencing, as well as getting a little yellow book if you're on campus, grabbing one from the library next time you're in if you don't already have one. So let's have a look at that web page now. which I've just referred to. I'm going to flick my screen over again. Go. Okay, so hopefully you'll now be able to see the browser I'm looking at. So in our CU Group Libraries page, there is links to various different services, including Locate, Flying Start W, and also down here, we have a link to our referencing guide. So we are using the CUG referencing page, which is we're using APA, but I'm going to link this one here, dropped in the chat again. This is libguides.coventry.ac.uk/CUG-ref. So we'll be using the APA guidance, and we'll be looking at the books, articles, and websites are going to be our main focus. If you require it, there is guidance on legal here, as well as using images and tables as well. Images can be a little bit tricky, but they are something that we necessarily need to include in our reports, in our other kind of documents as well. Okay, so I need to flip the screen back again. My apologies. Can you tell I've not used Zoom just for a little while? It's got a little bit rusty, it's changing between things. Right, so hopefully you can now see the presentation. So it's worth being aware that when we're quoting, we put things in quotation marks. When we're giving citations, we should give the author, year, and page number. Particularly when we're quoting, we need that page number wherever it is available. If we're quoting, we can't change the wording that we see. We need to make sure we're repeating it in the same way it was written in the original source. Paraphrasing allows us to make some slight changes to what the author has said, but we're essentially kind of matching sentence by sentence the ideas coming through. Or we maybe knock out a sentence or two, but we are giving essentially a rephrasing of what the author has said, or what you have heard if it's from a verbal source. This requires, again, the author and the year and a page number if it's appropriate. We're giving it in our own words, so we don't put it in quotation marks, and we are being quite careful to make sure we're not changing the meaning of what's been said. We're not selectively quoting to misrepresent what an author said. If they spent one page giving the counter argument to what they actually believe, we don't want to use that page to represent that they believe that counter argument. For paraphrasing, we suggest identifying the key points in the original source, try rewriting it without looking at the original and compare to see if you've done enough. If you really want to paraphrase, but you've actually written quite closely to the original source, it's worth having a go at changing the sentence order and structure from the original. So switch it into a different tense. This particularly is quite helpful for us when we tend to write in the present tense for assignments, and books quite often will be written in the past tense, or vice versa. The synonyms can also be helpful. Again, make sure that those don't change the meaning of what you're writing about. So this session has covered why we need to reference, when we include in-text citations to sources, and how to use and apply the referencing style we use. Coventry University uses APA 7th edition to create citations and a reference list. We provided some things to practice on. By all means, use whatever sources you like. If you're not sure about if you're getting it quite right, speak to your tutors, speak to your library staff, check in with academic writing tutors. There's lots of support available for you. So you can email your local library. I'm sorry, this page is for more Scarborough students. You can access the academic support via LibGuides as well. So the Academic Writing Service and the library provide support with that. There's a link through to the APA LibGuide, again provided in the chat. So as is appropriate for a referencing session, we will end looking at what we use to inform the session. So we've used the APA style guide. You can see that that has been referenced in that way. It's this full web page. We have, however, slightly dropped some italics there. So we want to make sure our full title is in italics. We've used another page from the American Psychological Association, which has come from their kind of guidance, their publication manual. We've looked at the referencing the APA style guidance from our APA page, and we've taken some guidance from Turnitin as well earlier on in the session where we looked at the plagiarism spectrum. So at this point, we've got quite a large group, but if we can tackle any questions now, we're very happy to do so. I think because of the number of people we've got on the call, it might be best if we can type queries in and we'll pick them up as best we can. I'm also just going to drop back to the front of the session, just so we're looking at something slightly more consistent. That's not the best way to get to the front of the session, but I will have to do. Okay, so any questions, I'm happy to pick those up. I'm also at this point probably going to stop the recording so that the questions aren't being directly recorded.